I am sitting in, I don't know where this is. This is southwest of Huntsville. Did my museum, supporting my museum live stream, and now I'm sitting here at the truck stop waiting for something to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. The topic I want to run over today is the Foreign Legion, French Foreign Legion. I took interest in it in the 1990s. I just one day started thinking about it and asking questions. And generally speaking, what we all know about the Foreign Legion is from movies, watching television and stuff, reading books. They made black and white movies about it back in the day. There's one that has Michael Caine fighting the Zulu warriors or something. And the most recent movie I can remember about the Foreign Legion had Jean-Claude Van Damme. And generally speaking, the Hollywood portrayal of the Foreign Legion are people that are running away, people that are trying to escape something. You got murder conviction or a murder charge, and you run and hide in the Legion, or you did fraud for millions of dollars, you go join the Legion and disappear, or something like that. But that's the media, the movie portrayal of all this stuff, and that's not really what it is. I did a little physical research, and the Foreign Legion came into being in 1830 that allowed people, basically within the colonies of France, to join and fight militarily for France, and the reward was getting French citizenship, and you could move out of the little country you were living in, whatever it was, third world country. And that was the basic concept, and they accepted people from wherever. And during my research in the 90s, the internet was in its infancy, so you couldn't just flip on the computer and Google everything and have it pop up in front of you. That's not how that worked. You had to dig a little deeper. And I had a couple of guys I ran with back then who were former military, and that's generally speaking, in the last, 50 years who joined the Legion are former military people from other branches just to try something weird. And these two guys I ran with actually got on a plane and flew to France. They used to be stationed out of North Africa, but that'll come up later. What happened is they were in Algiers, the headquarters of the Foreign Legion, but in the 60s and 70s, are you a hot shooter? No, I'm an expediter. Long range. It's like truck driving, but I use a van. I don't use a truck. Hot shot's what you're talking about. Kind of, sort of, but I do a longer range than that. The hot shot's usually a shorter thing. It's like courier work. But the Foreign Legion used to be in North Africa, but in the 60s and 70s, there was a bunch of political turmoil going on in Europe and especially in France. And there were some coup attempts going on, and somehow, someway, the Foreign Legion... I'm a trucker. What are you doing in the big truck park? I'm a big boy. I'm a big boy now. I get to park around the big boys. As a matter of fact, I parked in this area last night. I don't hog up the parking spot for a real truck. I use up the little oddball places that you can't even get you can't get a bobtail into. So yeah, I'm hiding back here with the big boys. That's how it works, you know. And like I said, the Foreign Legion was stationed in North Africa, but all this political garbage. And it was like on two separate occasions they got their fingers in the pie with coup attempts or political. They sent like a sniper team into Paris for something and they got caught. So they changed the rules and the headquarters of the Foreign Legion got packed up and moved into mainland France where that government could keep an eye on. They didn't like them being out there in the wilds. And the Foreign Legion, they use in dirty situations, stuff where you could be politically... Well, it wasn't really us, it was them, kind of. And they've been in, like, Norway, which I didn't realize that they'd fought Norway, Zaire, all of North Africa, Chad, Zimbabwe. They had a big contingent going to Mexico, French Guiana. They've been all over the place, and they've taken some hits. They've taken, like, in their history, their biggest notable actions were defeats. Actually, they just get overrun. And something interesting about their code of conduct is there is literally no scenarios, none, where they surrender. It says you will not surrender arms to the enemy under any circumstances, period. Wow. That's kind of harsh, but yeah, they just, doesn't matter. You're going to fight till there's nothing left. And in 1860, I believe it was, they had 50 or 60 Legionnaires guarding a fort in central Mexico. And 1,500 soldiers showed up. Mexican soldiers came in and surrounded them, and they said, surrender, and they said, not interested. Got a guy coming in front of me. They said, not interested. And they fought till they ran out of ammunition. And then they got down to their last 5 guys alive. They fixed bayonets and ran out the front gate and charged at the Mexican army, and they gunned them all down except one. And they stopped and he said, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? He said, this is our way we fight. And I said, well, I can respect that. And the guy in charge said, send him to the coast, put him on a boat, and send him home. And he said, I'm not giving up my weapon. And he said, we didn't ask you to. We didn't ask you to. Oh, excellent video. Really? Is this good picture is what you're saying? System, I'm trying to read that. System biology. Yeah, okay, it's sitting still. I just like watching the trucks come and go occasionally. So they sent the guy home. They let him leave, but he took his weapon with him, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I'm showing interest in the Foreign Legion. I got 2 guys I'm running with. One guy's name was Lance, and the other guy's name, for the life of me, I cannot remember. And those 2 guys got on a plane and flew to Paris. And they went to join the Foreign Legion, and they left. And about 8 or 9 days later, the second guy, whose name I cannot remember, I'm just going to call him Bob. Bob comes back, and I'm like, whoa, what's up? And he goes, yeah, well, let me tell you what happened. And he gave me the storyline of how it all went down. And he flew over and made some inquiries, and for the life of me, I couldn't be making this up. But they said the headquarters or the recruiting area for the Foreign Legion is in the town of Marseille. So they packed up, they traveled to Marseille, and they're literally using sign language, and they've got the word Foreign Legion written out, and they're showing it to people, and they're pointing, go that way, go that way, go that way. Eventually, they go down, they get into a kind of an industrial area, kind of like business offices. He said it was the design of the building is completely opposite of what we have here stateside. That is, our offices have doors and windows, and this place had solid block buildings with no doors, no windows, but a corridor that would get you inside of it, and then the inside was like a inward-facing apartment complex, for lack of a better description. So they're walking down the street, and there's like, no, look, you look at the corridor, and you go, no, and you go to the next one, no, and then they get to one that has a big iron gate, and on the other side of the gate, there's a guy in a military uniform with that little white hat. They call it a kepe or a pepe or whatever the heck it was, and they stop, and the guy says, we want to join, we want to recruit. The guy didn't say a word to him. And then they opened the gate, let him in, and he gestured. They followed him into the inner workings of the corridor, and they took him to an office. And there's a guy sitting behind a table, and he looks up, and they say, probably in that condescending French word, "May I help ye?" And they said, "Yeah, we want to sign up." And that guy said, "Let me have your documents." And they brought their passports and their military records to show what they had done, their background, their training, because I think they're a little reluctant to grab people just off the street. And they go, and then he says, okay, follow that guy, and they leave, and they take him into like a chow hall. And again, Bob, we're going to go with Bob. Bob said it was like a chow hall you went to in elementary school, just had that look and that feel to it, and they fed them. So they were sitting at the table, they ate, and they had little trays, and they were done, and they sat there looking around. Hey, Eric, what's up? And they just sat there for a while, and then eventually the guy came back holding a binder, and he told Bob, the guy who was telling me the story, he goes, you still owe IRR time to the Army. IRR is inactive ready reserve. I'm assuming the system is still in place 30 years later. But when you join the military, however you want to break it down, you owe them 8 years. You serve a 4-year tour, you get out, you go about your civilian life, you are on inactive ready reserve status for the next 4 years. You don't report in, you don't talk to anybody, you just do your thing. But in the event of an emergency, the military can reach out into the civilian world, grab you, and drag you back in for a term of another 4 years. If you serve a 3-year tour in the military and you get out, you own 5 years. It's whatever combo is needed to get to 8. And that has surprised a few people in the past when they get pulled out of civilian life to go back in the military. So he goes, since you owe IRR time, we can't use you. Legally, we can't take you. And again, there's this theory that they just take whomever walks in off the street, and they don't. They have to look at your background. If you're a serial killer or you got warrants out or something, they just don't say, oh yeah, we'll just pretend like that didn't happen. They don't do that. They bring you in and they make sure you're legit. There may be some minor league stuff in your past they'll step over, but they're not going to just wholesale give you a pardon because you want to join the military force. So they once they established that they can't use him, they literally rushed him out the front door and out the gate. He's standing out in the street now. Bob and Lance did not have a contingency plan for this happening, and this is pre-cell phone era. So he's going to stand out in the street. And he goes, okay, I'm just going to wait for Lance. They'll throw him out here in a minute. Well, he was out there for 45 minutes. Lance didn't come back, so he's like, okay, again, no contingency plan. So he goes, I'll just go back to the hotel. So he walks back to the hotel, stays at the same place, tells the lady at the front desk, if this guy comes in, tell him I'm in room whatever they put him in. And they said, okay. He goes to bed, wakes up the next day, no Lance. So Lance didn't get thrown out of the building. So he goes, well, I guess they're taking him. So he gets on a plane and flies home. And this is when I bumped into him, and I said, and beyond that, we didn't know what happened. About 2 weeks later, I get a letter in the mail from Lance. A big, thick, very detailed letter, which I still have somewhere, handwritten, describing what happened after Bob got run out the door. Because the guy came in, he said, okay, you have the credentials, are you interested in joining? And he's like, yeah, I want to do this. So they said, follow me, and they took him into another room, and there were 2 guys in there that are in the same boat he was in. One turned into be a Ukrainian guy, and the other guy was from South Korea. So, and they can't communicate. They tried, and they're all sitting there, and they all look nervous. They're all just hanging out. They were there for quite a long time, and then a guy came and gestured for them, and they followed him, and they sat down at a big table, and the guy pulled out a stack of paperwork and addressed Lance in English and said, this is the in-processing part where you sign for your contract. It's a 5-year contract, blah, 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 blah. And he held up some documents, and he said the name of the document in French, and I think it's papiers or something. And then he turned to the guy from South Korea and spoke to him in Korean, in his language, and he did the same thing. He's blah, 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 papiers, whatever. And then he turned to the Ukrainian guy and spoke his language. Now, the American military, this system they use over there is 180 degrees from what they do in this country. In the American military, when you join, they start with the physical stuff. They get you running and jumping and stretching and marching and blah, 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 blah. The French, at least the Foreign Legion, starts with the intellectual stuff up front. And then they work into the physical stuff, because as they were filling out paperwork, the guy kept slipping in more and more French words and holding up like the ink pen in the paperwork and the documents. And he kept slipping in more and more French words and less English and Korean and whatnot. And he said it was very subtle, but you're slowly picking up what he's saying. I mean, he's holding up boots and he's giving them whatever the French word for boot is. And he goes, by the second day, he's pretty much speaking French to us, and I can't speak it, but he said I could actually understand what the guy was saying, which was weird. And at some point, I turned to the Ukrainian guy, and I said something to him in French, and he understood it, and then we both stared at each other in shock that we both, within 24 hours, are able to communicate in a third language. And he goes, it was really weird how they did it, but they just subtly push you into the French language and understanding it within a day or two. And he says he found out that when you join, they change your name. Whatever you go in at, they change it, but you keep your initials. So Lance, whatever the heck his last name was, Lance Jones, he's going to be Larry Johnson or something. They're going to change your name, or Leonard or Lynn. They're going to change your first name, last name, but you keep your initials in when you're in. And he described when they're going into training and how they taught them how to do that really strange march that only the Foreign Legion does. And he mentioned they have bullpup rifles, which are kind of a strange, I don't know if they use them anymore, but the type of rifle. And he went into some details. And when I got this letter, I sat down with a pen and paper and wrote back to him. And about 2 weeks later, the letter came back as undeliverable because by this time they had changed his name and he's gone. And that was it. And I never heard from him again. He could be dead or alive today. I couldn't tell you. Well, in the year, then Bob, I lost track of Bob a long time ago. But Lance, he just disappeared into the system. In the year 2000, I actually sat down and wrote a letter to the Foreign Legion, and I asked, because they have armor, I've seen it, I asked, what are your aviation assets? And as a former attack helicopter pilot, I've got some skills that might be useful. And I got a handwritten letter back from the Foreign Legion, and they said, we don't have air assets. We ride on French military aircraft. They don't allow us to have air. Because I thought, that'd be kind of fun. Something weird. In 2002 or 2003, I was working in the Gulf of Mexico, flying. And the job out there is hauling people around the oil and gas industry. And my job as a pilot is to simply fly them there. But once we get there, I got nothing to do. They don't want you to get involved in the work they're doing, because if the pilot gets hurt, you got a problem. You can't leave. So the pilot stays away from the actual work that's going on. So I land, I got nothing to do. And this is still back in the era when people had books, actual paper books. So I was reading a book by a guy who had been in the Foreign Legion. He went to college, got out, joined the Foreign Legion, did a tour. And he was explaining some of the things. That's where I learned about the name change, and where he kind of explained how they had the food. The food was average, but there wasn't much of it, and it kept everybody skinny. And he said the footwear was terrible, and he got stationed somewhere in North Africa. He was guarding a fort, and he goes, it's 1 billion degrees outside, and we're wearing wool uniforms, which is bizarre. And one time he was at one of their headquarters buildings, and this is mid-late 90s, and all of their documentation is paper filing cabinets, and they had some computers sitting there which they were not using. And he finally asked them, why don't you use the computers? And they're like, we don't understand computers, we don't know how they work. So he got on there and made some folders and files and added all their paperwork and showed it to them and said, look, you just turn this on, you click here, you click there. And they said, they're looking at me like I taught them black magic or something. They were just like, oh, this is too confusing for the French. They didn't get it. They were just taken aback by it. But he did his tour and he got out, and the guy's name, and you can look him up, his actual, and I don't even know, I remember this, his name is Jamie Salazar. So if you Google Jamie Salazar plus Foreign Legion or author, the book will pop up. The guy was out there. Well, when Jamie Salazar was in the Foreign Legion, his name was Juan Sanchez, same initials. I read the book, I get all the way to the end, and it says, Jamie Salazar is in the oil and gas industry in Houston, Texas. Okay. I read the book, I throw it in the backseat of the aircraft. Early in the afternoon, we're offshore, I'm laying around doing nothing, and they go, run to the beach, grab the Galveston Island, that's where the airport was. Go to Galveston, grab some box of parts that's being delivered, and you're bringing some dude out. I went, all right, cool. I fly to the beach. And the book mentioned that Jamie Salazar was dark-haired and kind of on the small side, the short guy. Well, I land, I'm hot loading, hot fueling. This guy gets in, and I got to write down names and companies. I don't know who he worked for, but this guy gets in. I said, name? He says, little guy, dark hair. He says, Jamie Salazar. And without missing a beat, I said out loud, Juan Sanchez. And that guy's head snapped around so fast, I think his ear and his nose collided in the middle. Deer in the headlights. I said, dude, I just read your book. And he goes, oh, good God almighty, I haven't heard that in a long time. Yeah. Well, that was pretty much my last contact with the Foreign Legion, and he was talking about something he got in the middle of that they sent him on. And if you remember in the 90s, in Rwanda, there were two factions, the Hutsis and the Tutus. I don't know if that is a religious thing or a cultural thing or just people living on two sides of town. I don't know what the difference is or what the designation is, but the Hutsis and the Tutus were going at it. And they hate each other, and they were killing each other to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of people. And they weren't doing it with firearms. They were doing it with machetes. They were just chopping each other up. Well, they sent in the UN. I remember watching this on the news. They sent in the UN. They were there for like a year, and they couldn't stop the fighting. So the UN just said, this is a lost cause. And they packed up and left. And then they sent the Foreign Legion in. And I very much remember this news broadcast. There was a dude, a Legionnaire, standing behind a little barricade, and the guy was probably 6.5 feet tall, had a backpack on with you could see the antenna sticking out. He had a radio. The handlebar mustache with the winglets that come out like 5 inches on each side. He's wearing a beret, and he's holding a rifle. I don't remember what it was, but you know how when you hold a rifle across your chest, you got your hand on the grip and the trigger, and then your other hand is holding the body of the weapon. This guy looked like he was so big, he looked like he was holding a pencil. That's how big this dude was. At first I thought it was a submachine gun. It wasn't. It was a full-size rifle. He's just a gorilla. And this reporter walks up to him and says, the United Nations has been here for a year, and they couldn't have an effect on the situation. What makes you think you're going to make a difference? And she stuck the microphone in his face, and this dude looks down at her, and his comment was the greatest thing I've ever heard a military man say. And I quote, "This fighting, it will stop, or we will kill everyone and start over again." And 2 weeks later, that stuff stopped. and the guy I talked to in the aircraft was there. He said, yeah, they got a little mean with him. And they said, I think I'll just go home and have a beer. I think we'll stop doing this. And they got it done in 2 weeks. I got a kick out of that. But anyway, the Foreign Legion will accept anybody from 17 and a half to 39 and a half years old. Their average age is in the low 20s. So if you're in your mid-30s and 25 pounds overweight, and you woke up one day and go, hey, I think I'll go over there. Yeah, it's not an easy lifestyle. It's hard on the body. It's hard on the mind. The living conditions are harsh, and this is something I've learned. It's just, like I said, they have terrible footwear, uncomfortable clothes. They don't feed Legionnaires very well. That's why they're all super skinny. They don't, it doesn't work. And it's a rough life, but there's always a couple of buts. You can serve 15 years in the Legion and retire, like with a pension, which that's a little surprising. And when Jamie Salazar did his tour, he went in as an enlisted guy. He goes, you don't get paid jack squat, but you don't have like an apartment and a car. You're living on on their doyle. Your paycheck is minuscule, and they keep half of it. They literally don't give you all your pay. They keep it. So when you get out, they give you the other half of your paycheck. Well, I don't care how small your check is. Think of a small check, and then think of what half of it is and multiply that by 5 years. That's a lot of money. So his term in service was up, and they sent him back to Paris, and he went into a building, and they say, go in here and change. And they gave him a cardboard box that had all his clothes that he turned in 5 years ago, still in the box. He put on his clothes, which were loose and baggy and out of style, but they were there. He put them on. He's like, all right, now go in here and you sign a bunch of paperwork. And he was like, okay. And they go into that room, and then they hand him his check for his half a paycheck for 5 years. I mean, it was a substantial amount of money. And then the guy gestures, go through that door, and he walks through the next door, and it closes behind him, and he's standing in an alley. And he's looking around, and he's just standing there, and he's like, that's it? That's it? They just run you outside and close the door, and you're done. They don't say, have a nice day, thanks for your service, here's a certificate, said you were a good boy. Nothing, you're done, and you're gone. He's like, wow, they didn't even say goodbye. They just, you did your thing, get out of here. We're not interested anymore. Got a low boy, nothing on it. That's kind of unusual. Those usually have something on them. Huh. All right, well, those are my thoughts for today. I'm just sitting here waiting on something. I am, again, not Huntsville, Alabama, but about Decatur or something, just south of Decatur. And I didn't get a load yesterday, which means I'm not going to get a load on the weekends, and I'm stuck here for the weekend. I'm not happy about that. Right, nothing I can do about it. Watch this guy back in. But a black truck is just beautiful when it's clean, and it's extra ugly when it's dirty. It also absorbs heat. That truck that just backed out of frame had two radio antennas, two CB antennas, and I once asked my uncle, why do you have two antennas for a CB? And without blinking, he said, looks cool. Go, what's it say? I can't see squat in here with this. The lighting is always terrible in here. Let me pull this up. So I gotta pull this out of the mount to read. Go home? Yeah, great idea. You know how far home is from here? Yeah, my home, I live north of Houston, and I'm in Alabama. That's a bit of a hike. Ooh, got a headache. But that's it for today. I made another live stream this morning at a museum, the train depot museum. They had little model trains in there, and it turns out that all the trains they have were donated. People just had these. Why worry about what he is doing? No, just a comment. That's all that is. It's just you see trucks with two CB antennas. You go, what's the point? And he said, that looks cool. I went, oh. Okay, there's another one right there. Two, just looks cool. Oh, okay. Bring the truck back. You mean like mine? Like bring my vehicle back? Quit. This is my job. I'm not quitting. Besides, this is my van. This is my deal. The thing about being an expediter, especially when you own your own vehicle, is you get to make your own schedule. And right now, my schedule is going to keep me out here until the second half of August, where I'm going to meet the wife in New York, and we're going to go on the family homestead up there, the family farm, and go run around there for 6-7 days. Yeah, like I said, this is my vehicle, and I like it. This is my job. It's kind of stress-free. It's not really a big money maker, but it's something to do. It's just there's trucking all over the country, but for the kind of work I do, you got to be up in the core area, which is the northeast. Getting down here in the south is just not conducive. Especially on a Friday, it's a bad call. But anyway, it's just going to be a long weekend. I slept back here last night. Man, you must have more free time than me. I got to find another museum to go to, but the ones around here don't really interest me. They have a Jesse Owens museum in this area, and I'm curious as to why it's down here, because isn't Jesse Owens from like Illinois or Chicago or up in that area? Why would they have a Jesse Owens museum in Alabama? I don't think he was from this area. Anyway, that's my broadcast for this one. I just want to talk about the Foreign Legion a little bit. Stuff that pops into your head because your brain wanders when you're out here driving around at night. Alrighty, I'll catch up with you guys later.